kota Gela Acharya Thakur Kahamora Swarup Rupa Kahasanata Kahadasaragu Nata Patita Pavan Kahamora Pata Yuga Kaha Kavira Ikakale Kota Gela Gauranatara Ashane Kutipo Mata Anale Pashibo Gauranga Gunera Nidhi Kota Gede Papo Se Saba Sangira Sange Je Koilo Vida Se Sanga Napaya Kande Narotamada Se Saba Sangira Sange Je Koilo Vilas Se Sanga Napaya Kande Narotamadas Doyal Vaishnav Thakur, Doyal Vaishnav Thakur, Vaishnav Thakur, Doyal Vaishnav Thakur, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So this very special song given to us by Srila Narottam Das Thakur gives us the mood in which we should enter into this very auspicious day, the Tirobhav Mahotsava, or Disappearance Day, of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Srila Prabhupada, our divine Acharya. So read the translation to the song by Narottam Das Thakur. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who is filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasacharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatt and Gopala Bhatt? And where is Krishna Das Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against a rock and enter into fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees, in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. It's a very powerful song to really understand the mood of separation, which is called viraha. And viraha, even though it means separation, when you actually take the Sanskrit word, it means a very deep coming together, a union. So even though we're in separation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, we can gain his association by having this mood of separation and remembering his pastimes. And to first fully understand his greatness, I wanted to read from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 1, entitled The Spiritual Masters, text 46, which talks about Acharya. And there's a really nice purport by Srila Prabhupada about the Acharya. So, Acharya mam vijaniyan
Acharyam vijaniyan
Nava manyate karhichit.
navam manyate karhichit
Namartya buddhya suyeta.
namartya buddhya suyeta
Sarvadeva mayo guru.
sarva deva mayo guru
Acharyam mam vijaniyan.
acharyam vijaniyan
Navamanyeta karhichit.
navamanyeta karhichit
Namartya buddhya suyeta.
namartya buddhya suyeta
Sarvadeva mayo guru.
sarva deva mayo guru.
Synonyms: Acharyam,
Acharyam,
the spiritual master.
the spiritual master.
Mam,
Mam,
myself.
myself.
Vijaniyat,
Vijaniyat,
one should know.
one should know.
Na avamanyate, na avamanyeta,
Na avamanyeta,
one should never disrespect.
one should never disrespect.
Karhichit,
Karhichit,
at any time.
at any time.
Na,
Na,
never.
never.
Martya buddhya,
Martya buddhya,
with the idea of his being an ordinary man.
with the idea of his being an ordinary man.
Asuyeta,
Asuyeta,
one should be envious.
one should be envious.
Sarvadeva,
Sarvadeva,
of all demigods.
of all demigods.
Maya,
Maya,
representative.
representative.
Guru,
Guru,
the spiritual master.
the spiritual master.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Translation: one should know the Acharya as myself and never disrespect him in any way. One should not envy him, thinking him an ordinary man, for he is the representative of all the demigods. Purport: this is a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 17, Text 27, spoken by Lord Krishna when he was questioned by Uddhava regarding the four social and spiritual orders of society. The Lord was specifically instructing how a brahmachari should behave under the care of a spiritual master. A spiritual master is not an enjoyer of facilities offered by his disciples. He is like a parent. Without the attentive service of his parents, a child cannot grow to manhood. Similarly, without the care of the spiritual master, one cannot rise to the plane of transcendental service. The spiritual master is also called Acharya, or a transcendental professor of spiritual science. The Manu Samhita 2.140 explains the duties of an Acharya, describing that a bona fide spiritual master accepts charge of disciples, teaches them the Vedic knowledge with all its intricacies, and gives them their second birth. A ceremony performed to initiate a disciple into the study of spiritual science is called Upaniti, or the function that brings one nearer to the spiritual master. One who cannot be brought nearer to a spiritual master cannot have a sacred thread, and thus he is indicated to be a Sudra. A sacred thread on the body of a Brahmana, Kshatriya, or Vaishya is a symbol of initiation by the spiritual master. It is worth nothing if worn merely to boast of high parentage. The duty of the spiritual master is to initiate a disciple with the sacred thread ceremony, and after the samskar, or purificatory process, the spiritual master actually begins to teach the disciple about the Vedas. A person born a Sudra is not barred from such spiritual initiation, provided he is approved by the spiritual master, who is duly authorized to award a disciple the right to be a Brahmin if he finds him perfectly qualified. In the Vayu Purana, an acharya is defined as one who knows the import of all Vedic literature, explains the purpose of the Vedas, abides by the rules and regulations, and teaches his disciples to act in the same way. Only out of his immense compassion does the personality of Godhead reveal himself as the spiritual master. Therefore, in the dealings of an acharya, there are no activities but those of transcendental loving service to the Lord. He is the supreme personality of servitor, Godhead. It is worthwhile to take shelter of such a steady devotee who is called Ashraya Vigraha, or the manifestation or form of the Lord of whom one must take shelter. If one poses himself as an acharya but does not have an attitude of servitorship to the Lord, he must be considered an offender, and this offensive attitude disqualifies him from being an acharya. The bona fide spiritual master always engages in unalloyed devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By this test, he is known to be a direct manifestation of the Lord and a genuine representative of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Such a spiritual master is known as Acharya Dev. Influenced by an envious temperament and dissatisfied because of an attitude of sense gratification, mundaners criticize a real acharya. In fact, however, a bona fide acharya is none different from the personality of Godhead, and therefore to envy such an acharya is to envy the personality of Godhead himself. This will produce an effect subversive of transcendental realization. As mentioned previously, a disciple should always respect the spiritual master as a manifestation of Sri Krishna, but at the same time, one should always remember that a spiritual master is never authorized to imitate the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. False spiritual masters pose themselves as identical with Sri Krishna in every respect to exploit the sentiments of their disciples. But such impersonalists can only mislead their disciples, for their ultimate aim is to become one with the Lord. This is against the principles of the devotional cult. The real Vedic philosophy is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, which establishes everything to be simultaneously one with and different from the personality of Godhead. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami confirms that this is the real position of a bona fide spiritual master, and says that one should always think of the spiritual master in terms of his intimate relationship with Mukunda, Sri Krishna. Srila Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha 213 has clearly explained that a pure devotee's observation of the spiritual master and Lord Shiva as being one with the personality of Godhead exists in terms of their being very dear to the Lord, not identical with him in all respects. Following in the footsteps of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami, later acharyas like Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have confirmed the same truths. In his prayers to the spiritual master, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur confirms that all the revealed scriptures accept the spiritual master to be identical with the personality of Godhead because he is a very dear and confidential servant of the Lord. Gaudiya Vaishnavas therefore worship Srila Gurudev, the spiritual master, in the light of his being the servitor of the personality of Godhead. In all the ancient literatures of devotional service, and in the more recent songs of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and other unalloyed Vaishnavas, the spiritual master is always considered either one of the confidential associates of Srimati Radharani or a manifested representation of Srila Nityananda Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur ki jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Namine Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayataya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Bhagave Namaha. Madhurojvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gora Kuruna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute. Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna on this earth, having taken shelter at His lotus feet. I offer my respectful obeisances to Sri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayata Das, another name of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, who is favored by Srimati Radharani and who is the ocean of transcendental mercy and the deliverer of the science of Krishna. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, the personified energy of Sri Chaitanya's mercy, who delivered devotional service enriched with conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, coming exactly in the line of the revelation of Srila Rupa Goswami. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, who are the personified teachings of Lord Chaitanya. You are the deliverer of the fallen souls. You do not tolerate any statement against the teachings of devotional service enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami. Hare Krishna. Today, being the disappearance day, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, we are very fortunate to speak something and glorify this great personality. And for a conditioned soul like myself, how can I properly glorify this great Acharya who Srila Prabhupada and Krishna have just talked about, how he's the representative of all demigods. He is actually the supreme personality of Servitor Godhead. In doing so, I'll make many faults, but I sincerely pray to all the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis that I may say something about this great personality for my own purification and for to serve all of you and trying to help us all remember this great Acharya, this great teacher. When we look at the history of the Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, from the inauguration of the Sampradaya by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it flourished for some time. And then there was a little lull, and Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivasacharya, Shamananda Pandit, they brought back this great movement for all of mankind. And then there were great acharyas like Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushana that kept this great sampradaya going very strong. But after their disappearance, there was some Vaishnavas say a darkness that spread over the sampradaya. A darkness that kind of pushed this great movement underground. There were Shuddha Vaishnavas, pure devotees that were engaged in the service of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Radha and Krishna, but they were renunciates who were living in Vrindavan or Navadvip and very much secluded from the world around them. In the world around them, these teachings had become polluted by various apasempradayas or unauthorized movements. The Owl, Bowel, Sahajiya, Gauranga Nagaris. There are these different Vaishnav groups that deviated from the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya. They were all followers, so-called followers of Lord Chaitanya, but some of their teachings were not in line with the 6 Goswamis or the other acharyas who were teaching the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So for 3 centuries, there was this darkness, and the majority of people saw Gaudiya Vaishnavas as being very low class, until this great Vaishnava acharya named Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, just as Bhagirath had brought the Ganga down to this earth and cleared a path for the Ganges to flow, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, this great, powerful acharya, dispersed all the clouds of darkness and brought back the Shuddha Bhakti. So he was like a Bhagirath of pure devotional service and pure devotional teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He brought this great river of devotion back and reinvigorated the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we see how he wrote so many books, preached as widely as possible, and even battled yogis like Bisakasain. And yet he felt that, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you want me to preach all over the world, and yet I can only do so much. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur prayed. He made a very sincere prayer to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that please send me one of your personal staff members, one of your personal associates to help me perform this task of preaching Krishna consciousness as widely as possible. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu directed Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that he was living at Jagannath Puri at that time, and he said, go into the temple of Lord Jagannath and pray to Lord Jagannath's internal potency, Bimala Devi, or Vimala Devi, is the internal potency of Lord Jagannath. And so he prayed, and lo and behold, a beautiful son was born in Jagannath Puri, whom Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur named Bimala Prasad, the mercy of Bimala Devi. And when this beautiful young Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his shoulder and neck like a Brahmin thread. So it was hinting at his greatness. Actually, they had some astrologers come and perform the Jyotish ceremony. When a child is born, the astrologers come and they read the chart of the child, and they saw that we've never read anybody's chart like this before. He is a Mahapurusha. He is a divine personality. They were astonished at even the bodily features of this great personality. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, to further establish Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's greatness, he had a house that was on the road going to the temple where the Rath Yatra cart would go right by. And so miraculously, the Rath Yatra cart stopped in front of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house. Now, at the Rath Yatra cart ceremony, they try to move the cart, but sometimes Lord Jagannath, he will stop his cart wherever he wants to, and they can bring elephants and horses, and sometimes the cart will not move. So for 3 days, Lord Jagannath personally stayed in front of the house of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur took Bimala Prasad, his son, up onto the Rath Yatra cart, where he received his first grains. That was Mahaprasadam from Lord Jagannath. And the garland of Lord Jagannath fell around this baby boy Bimala Prasad. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was firmly established in his heart that this is the eternal associate of Lord Chaitanya that has come to help me spread Krishna consciousness. Now, to understand Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's determination in this world, as a very young boy, he once took a mango before it was offered, and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur kind of slightly chided him that you should not take a mango, you should not take anything that is going to be offered to the Lord before it's offered. At a very early age, he was either 3 or 4 years old, he vowed that he would never eat a mango ever again. And he followed that throughout his entire life. Even when he was an older person and somebody offered him a mango, he would fold his hands and say, I am an offender, I cannot take a mango. Now this is showing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's sanskars, because we do not even find this determination found in older people. And it's very, very important to understand that we just read how an acharya should not be seen as an ordinary person. So we cannot imitate Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, but we can take deeply into our heart his divine pastimes, qualities, characteristics, so that it can purify our heart, so that someday we will properly have the right mentality of serving Krishna. But to observe how this personality made such a vow, it's otherworldly. He's not just an ordinary human being. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he was trained by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Jagannath Puri. By the time he was 7 years old, he could fully understand Bhagavad Gita and give classes on it. He was giving classes on Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and works by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur established a preaching center in Jagannath Puri, Bhakti Kuti, I believe it's called. And there, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would daily give classes on Vaishnav philosophy. And it happened that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had to leave for some business. He was a magistrate and had to travel sometimes. And so he told his son, who was very, very young, 7 years old, 8 years old boy to give classes on his behalf. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he started giving classes. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a nice following. Many people were coming to his classes. And so as young Bimala Prasad was giving classes, less and less people started coming until there was only very few people that were coming to the classes. Bhaktivinoda Thakur came back and he asked his son that when I left, there was quite a crowd coming. Now there's only very few. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur said, better an empty cow shed than a cow shed full of sick cows. And he revealed to his father that he was pushing out any desire within the heart of these persons, pushing out any desire other than anya bilashita shunya jnana karma dhyanavartam. He was not wanting to accept anything but pure devotional service, as enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami, as stated in his Pranam mantra. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur saw how determined his son was to preach about Srila Rupa Goswami and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jagannath Puri, even one time, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's spiritual master, Diksha Guru, Vipin Bihari Goswami, was sitting, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur was going to touch the lotus feet of Bipin Bihari Goswami because he's his spiritual master. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, as a young boy, told Vipin Bihari Goswami that if you actually knew who Bhaktivinoda Thakur was, you would touch his lotus feet. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he is very liberal in trying to preach Krishna consciousness at the beginning. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur came to cut through all of this apasampradaya, cut through so many vines and obstacles that keep one from fully surrendering unto Krishna. In one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's essays on Acharya, he talks about how some think that the path of bhakti is very nice, is very carefree, it's a very soft path. But he says, actually, in this Kali Yuga, this path of bhakti, it's full of thorns and thorned bushes. And one has to be very careful on this path of bhakti. But what does the Acharya do? The Acharya knows that by picking up thorns, the thorns are going to scratch his hands and cut his hands. But the Acharya goes on the path of bhakti and rips up all the thorns and the thorn bushes, making it so that the disciples and grand disciples and even grander disciples can go on the path of bhakti, following the Acharya who's ripped up all these obstacles. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, we'll see how he's such a revolutionary preacher and yet very uncompromising is even the word that Srila Prabhupada used for a spiritual master. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, seeing how Bimala Prasad, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, was such a powerful Vaishnav, he initiated him, not formally, but gave him a japamala, gave him the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, even gave him a Kurmadev Shila to worship. The worship of Kurmadev is very symbolic because Kurmadev represents foundation, right? Mandara mountain sits upon Kurmadev, and the demigods and demons churn the ocean of milk, using Kurmadev as a foundation. And so worshiping Kurmadev, turtle avatar of the Lord, he was able to get a very nice foundation. And so he was put through school by Bhaktivinoda Thakur because his father wanted him to have a proper education so that he could preach to the intelligentsia of that time, especially the Bajraloka society. And so going to school, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was a sutradhar, meaning that if he heard something, he could remember it. In the biography, it talks about how he could remember a book that he had read 50 years ago and recite from a passage from that book just by memory. He was such an intelligent person. He went to school and he barely studied. Actually, he would hide the books of Narottam Das Thakur, Prema Bhakti Chandrika, and other books by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his desk, and he would secretly read the Vaishnav works while he was passing, getting, high marks. He became such a student that he entered into astronomy and astrology and became such an astrologer and astronomer. He wrote commentaries on Surya Siddhanta that they named him Siddhanta Sarasvati. So Siddhanta Sarasvati was actually given by professors of astronomy and astrology. Even one time he had a debate with one of the top astronomers and astrologers, professors at that time. And he defeated this astrologer in such a heavy debate. He defeated him so badly that hearing the explanations of Siddhanta Sarasvati, this professor involuntarily passed stool and urine. This is the intellect of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. And yet what happened? He saw that if I finish college, then there's going to be so many demands from my family. There's going to be so many demands from society. Better I not finish my college. So he became a college dropout. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his father, became a little worried, right? So even though Bhaktivinoda Thakur understood that this is a great personality, still because of affection, when affection is there, then sometimes it's very difficult to see the glories of a person. This is just like in Vrindavan, when Krishna does something that's so wonderful, like lifting Govardhan Hill. Because of the affection that they have for Krishna, they see past his glories and they worry about him. So in the same way, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had affection for his son and sometimes couldn't see the glory. So he felt, what is my son going to do? I'll arrange for him to become a tutor to the king of Tripura, who Bhaktivinoda Thakur was quite admired by. And so the king had a son, and so Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati became the tutor of the son. And he was paid a nice salary. But after some time, the mother of the son, the queen, she went to the king of Tripura and said, we have to get rid of this tutor. He's not good for our son. Our son, he's starting to wear tilak and kantimala. He's turning our son into a Vaishnav. He's going to renounce the world and not be heir to the throne. We have to get rid of this tutor. And so the king, who had affection for Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, said, actually, we're not going to have you come and teach our son anymore. But we still want to pay you. So Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was receiving payments from the king. And at this time, he became like the personal secretary of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, even helping editing certain works like Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Jaiva Dharma. Even Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur wrote the Palashruti to Jaiva Dharma, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the ending to it. And so he became like the personal secretary. Bhaktivinoda Thakur learned all about publishing books and performing so many duties. And Even we see how Bhaktivinoda Thakur, at one point he was sick and there was the Bali Guy showdown. Right? Some say Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had a certain sickness because it was his Diksha Guru, Bipin Bihari Goswami, who was heading these caste Brahmins, these upper sampradayas, to actually show how Brahmins are higher than Vaishnavas, right? Bipin Bihari Goswami was even trying to say that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave Govardhan Shila to Srila Raghunath Das Goswami because Raghunath Das Goswami was not Brahmin caste. So only the Brahmin caste can worship Shalagram Shila. So he had to worship Govardhan Shila. And he was trying to make many different accusations against the Vaishnav community, showing how casteism is very important. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur went in and debated. At first, he started glorifying the Brahmins, and they were all sitting there saying, yes, just see, he knows our glories. And then he started going into how Vaishnavas are even higher than Brahmins. And there's an essay that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur wrote, and he debated them in such a way that they were completely defeated. At the end, the people, they wanted all to touch the lotus feet of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and keeping from having a riot start, the policemen there, they washed the lotus feet of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur and threw water onto the crowds. So he became a quite powerful preacher of the truth of Vaishnav Dharma. And then he met his guru, Srila Gaura Das Babaji. Srila Gaura Das Babaji was a great renunciate living in Vrindavan, but he then went to Mayapur, Navadvip, where Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had reestablished the real birthplace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So just imagine how great these personalities are, that they're reestablishing Vaishnav Dharma and they're reestablishing the holy places of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is why the Vaishnav community glorified Bhaktivinoda Thakur as the seventh Goswami. So he reestablished Mayapur, Navadvip. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was present at the time that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had his great vision of Mayapur and his vision ultimately of the TOVP, which is coming to light now. And so Gaura Das Babaji traveled to Navadvip to then live his life and perform bhajan there, worship of Krishna, and take shelter of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He would regularly listen to this grihasta, householder man who had 13 children. Even though he was a great renunciate, they all saw Bhaktivinoda Thakur as the great acharya. And so the first time that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur saw Gaura Das Babaji, he was wearing a tiger skin cap, and he was singing a song, Kotai Go Prema Mahi Radhe Radhe, very famous song that talks about the love of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami to his Swamini Srimati Radhika. And so he saw Srila Gaura Das Babaji and wanted to immediately take shelter of this great personality. Now, Srila Gaura Das Babaji was illiterate, couldn't even write his own name. And yet, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, who is such an intelligent person, wanted to take shelter of Gaura Das Babaji. Now, there were so many Vaishnavas and different persons who wanted Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur as a disciple. Why? If we have a disciple like him, then we're going to be glorified. Right? This false guru, they want a disciple who will give them name and fame. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he wanted Srila Gaura Das Babaji as a spiritual master, he approached him. And Srila Gaura Das Babaji Maharaj says, he said, I had one disciple once, and he cheated me. He ran off, never to be seen again. So before taking any disciples, I must first ask Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura waited for some time, came back to Babaji Maharaj and asked, did you speak to Lord Chaitanya yet? Babaji Maharaj said, oh, you know what? I forgot. I had darshan of him, but I forgot. I forgot to ask. And a third time, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur pleaded with Babaji Maharaj to accept him as a disciple. And Babaji Maharaj, again, kind of discouraged him. These three ways he's testing. Everybody wants Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur as a disciple, but Babaji Maharaj is showing nirapeksha to test Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and to also show the world that he wasn't seeking after name, fame, adoration like the other false gurus. And Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he finally blurted out the statement, if I don't get your mercy, then what is the use of this life? I'm never going to give up. I'm going to keep trying for your mercy. And Babaji Maharaj then relented, told him to take bath in a tributary of the Ganges, the Saraswati, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was initiated as Sri Varsha Bhanavi Devi Dayata Das. And he served his spiritual master in so many ways because he was staying at the house of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, at one point, he decided to chant 1 billion names. So I worked out the math here a little bit. So for us, one round, he wanted to chant 1 billion names. And so for us, when we chant one round, it's 1,728 names. So when we chant 16 rounds every day, it's 27,648 names that we're reciting. Now, he was reciting 300,000 names a day to achieve this goal of 1 billion names. So he was chanting 174 rounds every day. That's amazing. And during this time, he was sitting before Murti of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he was also writing a commentary to Upadeshamrita, writing a commentary to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he was trying to manage different different preaching programs. So he became the sincere follower of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, and at the same time had to fight and preach against so many different types of apasempradayas. He even writes about how the Rupa Kaviraj, who was a defector during the time of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he was at one time a great Vaishnav Bhagavatam reciter, and he made an offense against Krishna Priya Thakurani, who was one of the greatest Vaishnavis at that time. Because of making an offense to her, all of these delusions and misunderstandings of the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy entered into his heart. We won't go elaborately into it, but he started deviating from the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So we can see how this apasempradayas, all these misconceptions that come about, it's not somebody sitting down and actively going, okay, I'm going to become a sahajya, I'm going to become Kartabaja, I'm going to become a Gauranga Nagari. No, these actually enter in to our heart through offenses, either through Nam Aparad, Seva Aparad, or even Vaishnava Aparad. So Rupa Kaviraj, he became a great defector, started preaching something that was against the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur completely refutes in his commentaries of Bhagavatam. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur writes a letter on how Bhaktivinoda Thakur confided in him that after the disappearance of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the seeds of Rupa Kaviraj would enter into the hearts of some of the disciples of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and spoil his preaching mission. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur had to even defend Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's legacy from falling into despair. I don't know how much time we have, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, after the disappearance of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, had to fight against other Babajis to receive the remains of his spiritual master to give him a proper samadhi. And then after the disappearance of his guru, disappearance of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was feeling very alone in this world, how to preach. But in a great vision, they all came to him and fully empowered him to go forth and preach this Vaishnava Dharma. And so he sat down and took sannyas from a picture of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. Now, again, he's not an ordinary person. So for ordinary persons, sometimes they see a picture of their guru and it's just a picture of their guru. But for a personality like Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, the picture of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji is non-different than Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. And he took sannyas, which we can see in our lineage. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas. Madhavendra Puri took sannyas. Many disciples of Madhavendra Puri took sannyas, like Ishvara Puri, Paramananda Puri, Brahmananda Bharati, so many. But there had become this fashion to take on this Babaji Vesh. And we see how Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, they didn't formally take any type of Babaji initiation. They just picked up a cloth on the side of the road and wrapped it around their waist, and it was white, and they didn't even care about this Varnashram system. But it became this fashion in our Gaudiya line that there was this Babaji Vesh. But in all of the writings of our acharyas, nowhere is this term Babaji used. Only in present day was it used. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur took on the dress of sannyas to then show how high it is to actually become a Babaji, to glorify his spiritual master. And as we see, he started what is called the Gaudiya Mat. He revolutionized Gaudiya Vaishnavism in such a way that it was a society that would go forth and preach the Dharma of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, as one of his first sannyasi disciples was actually a disciple of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj. Actually, and Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha's brother was also a disciple of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur told them to go to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. And so many great persons who were educated from Brahmin families started surrounding the lotus feet of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and then he became known as Srila Prabhupada, where other Prabhus are situated at his pada, lotus feet. And so starting the Gaudiya Mat, he would engage in writing, publishing the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and having so many articles written they had a newspaper that was published every day. They had another newspaper that was published every week. They had so articles and articles. There was this mass preaching, this Brihat Mridanga, right? Mridanga can only be heard so far, but he had this publishing that was amazing. And here's one amazing story that just blows my mind. So he had 3 disciples of his who would sit down in front of him. Sundarananda Vidyananda, Pranavananda Das Brahmachari at that time, who would then later become Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, and Vasudev, Ananta Vasudev, who was the youngest brother of Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj. And so these 3, they were the editors and writers of the magazines. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur would say one sentence to Ananta Vasudev, and he would write down that sentence. As he was writing down that sentence, he would say another sentence to Pranavananda. Then, as he was writing, he would say another sentence to Sundarananda, and then he would go back to Ananta Vasudev, say another sentence. In this way, he wrote 3 separate articles at one moment. Can you imagine dictating 3 different essays at the same time? That's mind-blowing. That's inconceivable. It's really amazing. So he was publishing articles every day. And so in the Gaudiya Math, he wasn't just publishing books, they were going out selling books. He started creating festivals where he would even have carnival rides and famous kirtaniyas come sing. And he established dioramas where they would make these dolls out of clay and straw showing the pastimes of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. He was completely revolutionary. And there's so much to say about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, but to show one of his, couple of his compassionate sides. Outside of the Gaudiya Math that he was staying at, when he would go on a morning walk, he would go out, there would be this old man who would curse at Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, saying so many things. And the disciples hated this person to hear blasphemy of their spiritual master. And every day it was like that. He would come out and this person would yell at Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. Until one day, this old man, he wasn't around anymore. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur asked his disciples, what happened to that old man? They said, oh, he had passed away. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur actually shed a tear and he said he was my real friend. Because he felt that this person was being real with him, and becoming a great Vaishnav, somebody might praise you. And then oh, yes, I am so great. And you lose that humility. But Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur saw him as his friend. And even another time during a celebration for Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he addressed all of his disciples saying that, actually, I see all of you as manifestations of my spiritual master, and saying that how he was their servant, that they were all sent to help him in this preaching, and he was their lowly servant. So he never saw himself as this great acharya, spiritual master, lording it over. Another amazing story is that I think it was in Bhakti Bhavan in Calcutta, there's a jackfruit tree that was growing outside the Gaudiya Math. I could be wrong on the place, but there was this jackfruit tree. And the disciples who were staying at the Gaudiya Math, they were always eager to eat a jackfruit, because the jackfruit, it gets ripe and it's so huge, you can feed so many. And so they would wait for this jackfruit to ripen. And then in the morning, it would be gone. They didn't know where it went. So they saw this numerous times. Jackfruit would be ripe, it's going to fall, and they'd go to pick it the next day, it'd be gone. So they started, okay, we're going to have somebody stay up at night and watch for the jackfruit. And so then they would watch all night long, nobody would come. And then the next day, the jackfruit would be gone again. And they couldn't understand who was taking it. So finally, they found out, because of going to Mangalarti, doing so many things in the morning, after prasadam time, all the residents of the Gaudiya Math would take rest. So there was one thief. He knew that they all take rest after eating. So I'll steal the jackfruits during the day, right in front of everybody, and they won't even notice. And so they found out that this thief, he was stealing jackfruit. And they caught the thief, and they were going to punish him, even take him to the police. And they said, one devotee said, well, we should take him to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. Let's see what our spiritual master has to say, and his punishment will be the greatest. So then we brought this thief to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati asked him, oh, do you live alone? He said, no, I have a wife and children, and it's kind of hard times, so we're trying to make ends meet. And I was taking the jackfruit to feed my family. And so then Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur said, well, today you can take the jackfruit, but you can't live just off of jackfruit. You should take some rice, you should take some grains, you should take it back to your house and properly feed your family. And the disciples were like, what? Why is Gurudev saying this? He's stealing from Krishna, he's stealing from us. How can he? And then he's going to get food from us? And they couldn't understand that when this person, this thief, he went back home, he told everybody on how great Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was, told his whole family, the whole family and so many other people, they surrendered their lives to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur for showing such compassion and care and love towards these people. And so the Gaudiya Math, it was building up. There's Vrajmandala Parikamas going on, Navadvip Parikamas that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur established. This huge preaching movement was going on. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur started seeing troubles in the maths. Some of the sannyasis, they were not acting as preachers anymore. They were just basically eating and sleeping. There's this huge temple, Bagh Bazaar, that was built. Renounced disciples were fighting over rooms. And during this time in Kartik, I believe it was 1935, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he went to Radhakund, and he was giving talks, and he met our Abhay Charan, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada at Radhakund, and he confided to our Srila Prabhupada that there's fire in the mat. And he says, actually, this Bagh Bazaar, it's created so many fights, in-house fights. And he said, actually, if I could, I'd take all that marble and I'd sell it and I'd print books. And he told our Srila Prabhupada, if you ever get any money, print books. And this was a very deep teaching for Srila Prabhupada. And actually, Srila Prabhupada, he had met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. They had received the instructions to preach in the West. This was a very big dream for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, that his disciples would go to the West and preach. And even Srila Prabhupada, he was preaching wherever he lived, he would have Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and Saranga Maharaj and others engage in programs at his house. And at one time, one manager of the temple went to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur and said, this Abhay Charan, he's living outside, but he should come into the mat and he should manage, and he would be such a great temple leader. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur said, let him be independent. In time, he will do everything. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So in revealing his heart to his disciple, Srila Prabhupada, he saw that there were so many troubling undercurrents in the Gaudiya Mat, and he started winding up his pastimes. And I wanted to read here towards the end. He's winding up his pastimes and talks about how he was afflicted by fever. He was kind of bedridden. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he gives this, I won't read all of it because of time, but he starts saying that I have upset many persons' minds. Many might have considered me their enemy because I was obliged to speak the plain truth of service and devotion toward the absolute Godhead. I have given them all those troubles only so they might turn their face toward the personality of Godhead without any desire for gain and with unalloyed devotion. Surely someday they will be able to understand that. And before I read more, there's actually is talking about the truth. There's a very interesting statement. He says, do not try to discover the nature of truth by the exercise of your imagination. Do not endeavor to attain the truth through experience of this world. Do not manufacture truth in order to satisfy your erring inclinations or hastily accept anything for the reason that it satisfies such inclinations. Do not regard as truth anything that has been built up or has the support of a majority people like yourself, nor is untruth anything that is rejected by the overwhelming majority. According to the scriptures, there will be found hardly one in a crore of human beings who really worships the truth. What is proclaimed by the united voices of all the people of this world as truth may turn out to be false. So, very powerful statement about truth. What is proclaimed by the united voices of all the people of this world as truth may turn out to be false. So he talks about how he always spoke the truth. And he says, all of you propagate the message of Rupa Raghunath with supreme enthusiasm. Our ultimate desire is to become dust at the lotus feet of the Rupanugas. All should remain united in following the Ashraya Vigraha for the sake of serving the Advaya Gyan. In this ephemeral sphere, you should live somehow or other only for Hari Bhajan. In spite of all dangers, criticisms, and discomforts, do not give up Hari Bhajan. Skipped the last part, that may the conceptions of the Rupanugas flow in the world. Let us never feel the slightest dejection while engaged in the seven-tongued flame of Sankirtan Yagya. Only if we have undaunted and ever-increasing attachment for it shall we achieve all perfection. Under the guidance of the Rupanugas, all of you should fearlessly and with utmost energy preach Rupa Raghunath Katha. On the morning of December 31st, Srila Sarasvati Thakur requested Srimad Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj to chant Sri Rupa Manjari Pada. But after Sridhar Maharaj started singing, Kunja Bihari Prabhu directed that he stop and the reputed Kirtaniya Pranavananda Prabhu take over. Srila Sarasvati Thakur then stated that he was not concerned with melodious intonations. He didn't care about the melodious voice, but he wanted to hear devotion. So Sridhar Maharaj recommenced. And that morning, he also gave many important instructions for continuing the movement and joining his disciples to form a governing body of 10 or 12 members and cooperatively conduct missionary activities under their guidance. And he said, all of you present and absent, accept my blessings. Remember that our sole duty and dharma is to propagate service to the Lord and his devotees. The next morning, January 1st, 1937, at about 5:20 in the morning, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur left this physical plane and was reinstated in his service as Nayana Mani Manjari. This is the eternal Svarup of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur in Vrindavan, that he is known as Nayana Mani Manjari, which Nayana means eyes and Mani means the jewel. So he is the jewel in Srimati Radharani's eyes, which has been directly, that Swarup has been directly intimated by himself. So there's always a lot more that can be said. If there's any others who would like to say any reflections or speak about the glories of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur at this time. Otherwise, we can end here if everybody's satisfied.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you. Obeisances. So I was just wondering if you had any reflections on the similarities or differences in the passings of Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. You know, any similarities or differences in mood. Sometimes devotees would say that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was disgusted, you know, the way things were going. So, and they said, oh, Prabhupada might have been the same. Anyway, just if you had any reflections on that. Thank you.
Krishna. Yeah. Even though there was these troubles that were coming in the Gaudiya Math, and Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was trying to address them, still he felt that the Gaudiya Math and preaching would still go on, even if there were a few persons in the Math that were, you could say, delinquents. And so it's interesting because when you in Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, you get this overwhelming understanding that at the same time he's seeing things happen and he's trying to correct them, that at the same time he still has faith in many of his disciples and in the movement that he started. In fact, one of his disciples, during the winding up of his pastimes, when Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was ill and kind of bedridden, one of his disciples, who is very dear to him, we won't name names, but came to him and started complaining about the Gaudiya Math and saying, it's all going to fail. How is this going to go on? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur became disgusted with this disciple and said, I don't want to see your face while I'm leaving this world, because you've lost faith in your God brothers and this mission. And it struck this disciple's heart because he thought, oh, I'm going to go to my spiritual master and complain about how his movement's going to fail. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur he even, he had so much trust and faith in many of his disciples. Even Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he was given the name Bhakti Rakshak and wrote many works, even glorifying Bhaktivinoda Thakur, even writing works that glorified Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and said that we have one man that he has such faith and knowledge of the Siddhanta that I can rest easily now that the mission will go on. What to speak of having faith in Srila Prabhupada and Pranavananda and Nanta Vasudev, so many that he had deep faith in. And so to say that these personalities are leaving because they're disgusted with a few disciples, even though there's other disciples that are pushing on the movement, I would say we're trying to see the acharyas and conjecturing their moods through our mundane vision. Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, they made certain statements to then push on the movement to show that this isn't proper, what's going on. But they never lost faith in the movement or in certain disciples. So their passing away is also glorious in allowing to show how these great personalities, Srila Prabhupada's passing is such an inconceivable act that he stopped eating and drinking. And one of the doctors said that, this person should be screaming out in pain that he's lost so much weight that his nerve endings are at the, are kind of like so near his skin, but yet he's completely peaceful. So we have to see it in the transcendental light that these personalities wind up their pastimes, giving opportunities to show us how great Vaishnavas leave this world. And it's not just about a few people that are not acting properly, and then like all faith is lost in the movement. Would you care to comment or have any reflections on that?
Thanks, Prabhu. Yeah, I was thinking there's a lot of naysayers in life all the time, and speculations and everybody's perceptions, right? But the actual mood of the acharya, that I guess can only be understood by those who are on pure level to appreciate. And so gives devotees hope that, even though there's so much naysaying all the time and this and that, even about our own movement, that there's always going to be those who will sincerely push on and glorify mission. So we have to look at the positive situation and take shelter of such persons who are pure and enthusiastic to push on the mission and be able to follow them. So thanks a lot, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Is there anything else before we wrap up? I know it's getting quite late.
I have a question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Bhagopal Das Prabhu, my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to your Guru Maharaj, and all glories to, again, a class of monumental quality, if I may say it. Prabhu, you recited I think the expression is pranam mantras in the beginning of the class related to glorifying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. Yes, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati pranati. And in the last verse, you recited that he was intolerant against any declaration against the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami. So my question is, do you know any specific episode where I would find Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj exercising this intolerance against the teachings of Rupa Goswami? At least one, if you could.
Yeah, specifically, we could say the Rupa Kaviraj, the seeds of Rupa Kaviraj entering into the family and disciples of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So there's particularly one that's going against the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami that he had to really fight against. We see that he's even writing in the harmonist letters against this. We could see the Baligai showdown as being one. And yeah, it's we could see it in many different ways. But in terms of, if you're asking, like, if somebody's saying something that Srila Rupa Goswami's, like kind of, you're asking like a particular incident where he's like somebody speaking against Srila Rupa Goswami, I would ask, or because his whole life is, his whole life is about reinstating Srila Rupa Raghunath Katha. So in almost every step, because even in being like so forceful with some of his disciples and what they were reading and what they were studying, he had to really smash this Apasampradaya. I mean, Sahajiyism was even rampant with some of his disciples because of their coming from a family of Sahajiyism. So every step of the way, he's having to just reinstate Srila Rupa Goswami's teachings.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Yes. Go on.
And it's interesting how also when he was a young boy, he actually went to a mat of Shankaracharya to learn Mayavad philosophy from a Mayavadi sannyasi who was the head of that mat. And some people saw him going every day studying so rigorously that they were afraid that he was going to become a Mayavadi sannyasi, but he was studying just so that he could, every step of his life, defeat this Mayavad philosophy. So.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Wonderful answer to my question. Hare Krishna.
Krishna. Would Vrinda or Tushta like to say anything, or anybody else like to say anything about Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thanks so much for glorifying Bhaktisiddhanta. I was finding it interesting that his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his mood was liberal, like quite liberal. And then Bhaktisiddhanta was very cutting. Like, that's the story of how when Bhaktivinoda was gone, how the attendance dwindled. And I just think that that dynamic between the two of them, that one's mood and the other's mood, that, I don't know, I guess it just goes to show that they're different people and they have different missions, and at the same time the mission is the same.
Bal Prabhu, I'm sorry, Vrinda Mataji brought a very special part of your class. Can you repeat it again? What is it that he said to his father? Better to have a cowshed?
Better to have an empty cowshed than a cowshed full of sick cows.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. That's a beautiful point that you bring up, Vrinda, about how different persons may have different moods, but the mission is the same. And it's interesting how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had to move in that society to reinstate the actual teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But then at the same time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur then had to defend his father, who, actually, very important point, he never saw Bhaktivinoda Thakur as his father. And this is very much elaborated in Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava through many letters and teachings, that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur always saw Bhaktivinoda Thakur as an intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya, one of his first spiritual masters, never called Bhaktivinoda Thakur his father. And yet other people who would claim, oh, he's our father and we're spreading misteachings, and he had to defend Bhaktivinoda Thakur in so many different ways of how Bhaktivinoda Thakur was preaching pure devotional service, even though sometimes there's one incident where Bhaktivinoda Thakur would he would hire famous kirtaniyas. And even Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he saw this one time where one group of Vaishnavas, they got this kirtaniya, and he would sing and he would go into ecstasy, and he would go into such ecstasy that he would faint for half an hour. And so then another kirtan group, they tried to get another famous bhava kirtaniya to then sing very melodiously, go into ecstasy, and then faint longer than the other kirtaniya to attract more group. And they were paying these kirtaniyas in ganja and money. And then one of the kirtaniyas, he couldn't sustain fainting long enough, and he got up, and they said, no, we paid you so much ganja to faint for this amount of time. And he said, you need to pay me more ganja then. And so sometimes Bhaktivinoda Thakur would hire these kirtaniyas to attract people. And then some people would try to imitate Bhaktivinoda Thakur by doing that same thing. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur had to show how Bhaktivinoda Thakur was preaching to a certain type of people, getting those kirtaniyas to then draw people in, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur would then smash those kirtaniyas and speak the proper philosophy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's even times where Bhaktivinoda Thakur, just to establish a temple in, I believe it was in Mayapur, just to keep the temple running, he would daily supply this pujari with ganja, with marijuana, just to keep him satisfied in keeping the temple going. So it's, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and starting something so grand, which would then fructify with Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, then even take a generation to get to Srila Prabhupada. And what we have today is a very established society that keeps the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu alive. So it's very amazing to see like this whole history play out in the different moods and the different tactics that they had to use to preach. And Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur was liberal in his own ways. There was a German scholar who was staying at one of the mats, and yet he was a tobacco smoker. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, just to keep him in the mat, would daily supply him cigarettes, just so that the scholar would learn Vaishnava philosophy. So it's very, very amazing, and also liberal in the sense that, some Vaishnavas thought Ekadasi meant, Nirjal, we're not going to take any water, but Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was very pleased that some devotees would eat, fruits and roots and then go out and preach. And so he was very liberal in his own ways and strict in certain ways. So it's yeah, it's amazing to like really see the nuances of these personalities, preaching tactics also, which might be frowned upon today in our society.
Balgopal, related to what you just said, there's a saying, who knows what is going on in the mind of a pure devotee?
Vaishnavera Kriya Mudra. Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. All right. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Tirabha Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Vanchakalpa Yascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Bhaktitanam Pavani. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai. Wonderful class. Thank you very much.